I'm Kaspar Szymanski, and this is SEO in 2024.
Kaspar, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
Well, if there was one thing I could recommend to our listeners, that is data. Use data. Use relevant, fresh data for your SEO. Focus on what really counts. In particular, server logs, one of my favorite topics, and that in reference to large websites. Do not get distracted by short-lived SEO trends. SEO really is only about relevant data and nothing else.
Relevant data. And you also say that it's all about signal input. So is that what you track with data?
Correct, David, and thanks for having me on the show. So allow me to elaborate a little bit, because there is a lot of sources of data out there that we as an industry, we as SEOs, as professionals can tap into. The reason for doing this to begin with, because anything else is really guesswork, right? So conducting SEO, building a strategy, introducing changes, being that on the content or the technical side, or maybe on the off-page side, all of these things, doing those things without any data foundation really is guesswork, and that's a business risk. We don't want to be doing that. So on the very basic level, what any webmaster really out there should be doing if they want their websites to be doing well in Google search, that's of course tapping into Google Search Console, and this is very important also to tap into Bing Webmaster Tools, because that's another source of data that really demonstrates how search engines perceive our signals, our website signals. But it doesn't stop there. We're talking about really large websites, and they can do so much more. And the most important thing, and the one item that is frequently neglected, really, if not completely ignored, that's server logs. In my experience, and we work a lot with large websites, frequently completely ignore server logs. 9 out of 10 times, they don't record them, or they only record them for a brief period of time and ignore the data subsequently, or overwrite it as time passes. And that's really rather unfortunate, because there are so many things that can be done with server logs recorded over an extended period of time. To begin with, we can start understanding how much is there an overlap between the landing pages that we care for, so desirable landing pages, what preferably should be in the XML sitemap, and the number or the volume of landing pages that are being reasonably frequently crawled by Google, so crawled and recrawled, in order to understand the changes that are being introduced to existing landing pages. And that's just beginning to scratch on the surface.
And that little scratch there brought out so many potential questions. Let's go down the Bing Webmaster Tools route first of all. So what's the difference between Bing Webmaster Tools and Google Search Console? What are SEOs missing out on by not using Bing Webmaster Tools?
Well, there is, of course, the relevance is, of course, much higher for Google Search Console, from a Google Search Console perspective, and that there is a relevance in terms of market share, right? The vast majority of online marketeers, website operators, webmasters out there, they care primarily for Google search, just because the market share is really rather dominant, still around somewhere between 90-95%, right? So that is a very interesting and separate question. But those relevant, those remaining, say 5 to 10%, it appears like not all too much, but it can represent the lifeline in the situation where my organic traffic from Google isn't forthcoming for a reason. That can be because Google changed something, because there's a Google algorithm update, because something was done on the website unintentionally, or maybe there is some legacy issue and that's holding the website back. So those 5 to 10% can make a real big difference. But to answer really your question, what's the difference here? The data we're getting from Google Search Console is, of course, much more comprehensive, much more interesting. But with Bing data at hand, we can verify things, or at least look from a different perspective. It isn't completely one-sided. Most importantly, it is cost efficient, right? Because all of the data is available free of charge. We don't have to pay any other external tool. There are great tools out there, as you know, as your t-shirt does say, but these are paid solutions, so there is an additional budget required. So with regard to data at the very basic level, Google Search Console is the absolute minimum. And if we want to do a tiny little step on top of that, Bing Webmaster Tools does help us as well to understand how a website is being perceived, how it's being crawled, whether there are any issues. But it doesn't stop there, of course. There is so much more that can be done.
And can you automatically take the data from Bing Webmaster Tools and take it into something like Looker Studio and combine that with Search Console data to provide a more holistic view of your data in general?
It is indeed possible to do bulk exports, which is actually a super question, unfortunately rarely brought up. It is important to export data in bulk and to retain it, because that data isn't going to be available to us in perpetuity. It is being overwritten, right? So this is really a snapshot of the last 90 days in terms of what Google is saying. Yes, it is possible to export it. Yes, it's possible to import it into other tools. We do it slightly differently. We have our own proprietary software, our own proprietary approach, if you want, but it is something that can be done. It is, however, important, if data is being utilized, that this is being done by someone that has the necessary capacity in terms of understanding what the data actually means. What I'm trying to say here is, if that data indeed is being exported and utilized, whether with a third-party tool or in any other way, either we have in-house that capacity to actually read the data, understand it, and draw conclusions based on that data, or it is indeed better to have a third party helping to read and understand the data. And it doesn't have to be done on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. This is also important to understand. There are, of course, large websites out there, say 100 million landing pages or 500 million landing pages. This is the kind of website where the data volume justifies the resources necessary so that the website is being continuously improved, continuously optimized. That can be done. But for smaller websites, it doesn't have to be done on a daily or weekly basis. We talked privately about cars. We are both rather passionate about cars prior, but the car comparison is really what comes to mind here. If you happen to have a car, you would bring it to the garage just for an annual checkup, to check the fluids, check the brakes, check the lights, all of these things that you really want to be working perfectly fine when you're going on that trip, on that family trip, to the beach. You don't want to get stuck in the middle of the road because you got a flat tire or, because the fluids aren't really available. So this is the kind of situation that we have with the websites as well, with the kind of smaller websites, which require that data to be reviewed on a regular basis, but far from, weekly or even monthly effort. Once per year is perfectly enough. The important thing that this is being done, and that it is being done by somebody who is actually competent to understand what the data means and how to translate that into actionable advice.
And you touched upon server logs. What's the optimum way to use server logs?
My pet project, my favorite topic, if you want. Thank you for asking. I really love server logs because it allows us unprecedented insights into how our servers or our server, the website server, how it interacts with bots, not just Googlebot. There is a multitude of things that can be understood, but a very important one is, of course, understanding the crawl budget. So I started talking about that prior. We have to have the server log data covering an extended period of time to actually verify how much of the website is being crawled on a regular basis, knowing full well that, for instance, the web, the root, the homepage is going to be crawled much more frequently than other pages, right? Because only with that data at hand can we understand how big is our website and how long is it going to take for Google to recrawl the website. Is it important how often the website is being recrawled? It depends. Are you, for instance, in the travel industry or in the retail industry? If yes, it's critically important, because if Google doesn't recrawl the changes introduced to the landing pages, you're running, of course, a huge risk of having expired content that is still ranking, which the users can't use. They can't purchase that the travel package. They can't purchase that item that they will be looking for because it's sold out. Now, if these landing pages still rank, this is bound to create very poor user signals, and those poor user signals, they're going to destroy rankings. There is no other way of saying that. So this is just one way, right? We want to understand how much of the website is being crawled. And then also we want to understand what is being crawled, in fact. Is it the FAQ pages and the press releases? Is it the supplemental blog that we create only really just as a filler content? Or is it the actual sales pages? Is it the landing pages? that we want to rank because they are the cash cows. So these are just a few things that are really critically important. Of course, having server logs at hand, we can also understand how much of a waste is there. How often is the website being actually really scraped and crawled by fake bots? And many, many other things. If I may, I penned an article on that published on Search Engine Land a while ago. And that article outlines the benefits with really very few downsides of server logs being introduced. There are, in fact, the only downside, or the roadblocks, if you want, really are they originate from two departments. First, often being the legal department saying, this is problematic. Server logs in the time where data is being protected. And it's kind of true, but it doesn't apply to server logs because we're only talking about bot data, right? We do not care for users. So that can be completely filtered out. So there is no risk of actually utilizing any data in an appropriate way. And the other issue that is being often brought to the table is expensive. It's going to cost us money. And yes, certainly it's going to cost money, but very relatively little money. Hard drives are as cheap as they've ever been, and server log data is relatively small. It can be compressed, it can be gzipped. So it can be stored on a physical hard drive in perpetuity, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. But the potential to tap into that data in the course of conducting an SEO audit is just huge.
Use the phrase critically important. I'm sure if I asked 100 SEOs what's the number one most critically important activity that an SEO should be doing, more than half of them would say something different. So how does an SEO actually define what is the critically important thing for them to focus on as an individual within their brand, and manage to differentiate between that and some other activity which is perhaps hyped over the short term, but not so relevant for their business over the longer term?
And the honest answer here really is it depends. It depends on every individual website, organization. They're all different, right? There is, however, one critical item which, if we look from a perspective of, yes, we want to do well in Google search. Yes, we happen to be a commercially motivated operation, some sort of e-commerce activity. There's one item which really is critically important, and that is the unique selling proposition. The one thing that makes the operation stand out. It can be because we have the best price ever. So a unique selling proposition founded on the most attractive pricing. Or there could be a great community behind the product. It could be the best selection of products, the most in-depth selection in particular vertical. It can be a combination of those. The important thing really is for the users to convey that message to the users, to make sure they understand that this real brand, a particular brand, stands for a respective unique selling proposition. And then also to convey that message on the landing pages and in the snippets. So in the snippet representation of landing pages that are being crawled and indexed and ranking. Doing so helps us massively to positively impact user signals, right? If our landing pages rank for relevant queries, if we can not only live up to that expectation, whatever it is behind that query, but also meet or exceed user expectations on the landing page, this is going to translate to Google positive user signals. And this is what's going to help us, our website, to rank well. It is true. Google shows a preference for websites that are popular by users. So putting the user first via the unique selling proposition is a winning strategy. It's not the only thing that needs to be done, of course, in many cases, especially in competitive environments. But without the unique selling proposition, it is very, very difficult indeed.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2024?
Yes. Oh, how many feet can I step on answering that question? Our industry isn't very different from others. There is a lot of myths and a lot of, I don't want to say snake oil salesmanship, but there's a lot of concerns on the client side which do not really need to be addressed. And one item that I happen to be running into on a regular basis talking to prospective business partners is domain authority, So if I may suggest something, and a lot of people who are prospective clients will love it, and some people in the industry probably not so much, please stop talking or even thinking about domain authority, right? It is literally a poor allocation of your time and resources. And the reason for saying that is because Google doesn't care for that value. So whatever the domain authority, the perceived domain authority may be, it is not something that Google will say, oh yeah, this is great or this is really bad. It's just of no consequence. So we don't need to think about it as an SEO industry.
Kaspar Szymanski is the director at Search Brothers, and you can find him over at searchbrothers.com. Kaspar, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and a joy. I'll be happy to be on your show again if the opportunity is presented. Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at seoin2024.com.